Hello, this is the Game Philosopher, and today we're talking about information, of course. This is a very interesting age that we live in. In fact, the computer has exposed us to a lot of information. We do not know all the information that's on the computer. We don't know what's reliable, what's not reliable. In fact, you don't even know if that's a real glare of light right there, even though I decided to be stupid enough to film right next to a window. So you see the little blinds, which are not really effective at keeping the light down. So, bad filming aside, um, how do we deal with this type of stuff? What takes prominence in our information uh, understanding? Well, looking at things like there's a pandemic, a lot of times uh, what is shown on the news is exactly what you would think it would be pandemic related stuff. It's an election cycle. What gets prominent on the news is election related stuff. And furthermore, people with their biases will say, and they research something, what's the problem with this candidate, or what's this guy's issue here? They might search, for example, if they're into free choice versus, you know, the freedom of choice and the abortion thing versus pro-life. It will say, how does this candidate stand on abortion, or how does this candidate stand on the right to choose? How does the candidate stand on the right of the woman? Or so on and so on and so on. On the other hand, you would have people asking this or that. It's all related to what we experience, and a lot of times our cognitive biases, which influences information loop, which are why we think certain ways. So it's really hard to get someone out of a particular pathway of thinking. You could say that essentially their ideas unfortunately become a lot of times who they are because a lot of people are ideologically driven. They might not think about ideology a lot, but they definitely become ideologically driven. In fact, when you think about how this light influences how I look, it's the same thing. Now, I would like to tell people that I have a pretty good full head of hair, but this light kind of dims this little part while the other parts get shown, so it looks like I'm bald up here when I'm not very badly bald. So there's that. Now, according to this book, which I'll cite in the description, even though I usually don't do it, The Steps to the Ecology of Mind. This is a really great book. Uh, it's a book written by a guy named Gregory Bateson. Uh, he was the son of a pioneer geneticist William Bateson and the husband of the renowned anthropologist Margaret Mead. His work spanned many fields, from anthropology and communication theory to studies of alcoholism, schizophrenia, Veterans Administration Hospital in uh, Palo Alto, California. His classic works include Lavine, Balinese Characters, and co-authored with Margaret Mead and Mind and Nature. So, what does he say about this ecology? Why is it? How is it that we get our information from the outside sources, and how does it affect our way of thinking? How does it influence everything about ourselves? Even though we would say and would hope that we are separate from the environment. So let me list. Oh yeah, and I quote. Let me list what seems to me to be the most essential minimal characteristics of a system, which I will accept as characteristics of mine. 1. The system shall operate upon and with differences. 2. The system shall consist of closed loops or networks of pathways along which differences and transformations of differences shall be transmitted. What is transmitted on one neuron is not an impulse, it is news of a difference. Many events within the system shall be energized by the respondent part of a trailer of a part rather than by the impact from the triggering part. The system shall show self-correctiveness in the direction of homeostasis and slash or and the direction of a runaway. Self-correctiveness implies trial and error. Now these minimal characteristics of mine generate whatever and whenever and wherever the appropriate circuit of structure of causal loops exist. The mind is necessary, an inevitable function of the appropriate complexity wherever that complexity occurs. So there you have it. There's a complexity that goes on even for simple things. It's and things tend to be self-corrective. So let me give you an example I really don't like to do, but if I were to have a hot stove and I were to touch it, I'd be like, ah. Then after that, I will not touch the stove anymore. That's called cybernetics in the first order of cybernetics, at least because there's two orders of cybernetics. The first order, of course, being how man operates with the machine, and second order cybernetics is essentially this whole entire thing of feedback, such as what you just heard in that thing, in the sense of how the system evolves ontologically and studies itself. That cybernetics of cybernetics becomes the entire idea of the cybernetic system, that it actually ends up looking at the cybernetic feedback and how it actually goes around things. That it studies the role of human observers in a construction of any model or system and within the context of other observers. So you have a lot of people observing things that are going on. Then, as this observation, this loop comes around, uh, and by the way, if you study a lot of philosophy, you'll see that pretty much Western men like to have these little circles going on. Like, think about it, we have circular reasoning, we have the hermeneutic circle, we have these little loops in cybernetics. So it's just interesting because it has a little repetition where one thing happens and it generates something else, has a new loop that goes on, and it's because you make this one feedback or this one response, then the feedback happens, then that feedback creates another response and goes on ad infinitum. Now, looking at some stuff from this other thing that was mentioned in that very book, you have many different interesting processes of form and process as it's within a level of analysis. Right there, what we see is the description of actions, typology of sexes, the interactions that determine the typology, types of themes, and the interaction between themes. Another good one is the calibration versus feedback, personal status, genetics of training and training of persons, personal threshold, too hot or too cold, bias, escalating temperatures. So I showed those two because it's very important indeed as charts, because like it shows really how our biases form based off of a mixture between the objective and the subjective things that interact together. Now, a lot of people in fields of epistemology will ask, what's subjective, what's subjective? They might even say everything's subjective or everything's objective, but really, there's a lot of different things that go on. Society is more complex than that. Some things are subjective, some things are objective. Now, there's another interesting chart I want to point out that reflects a lot of this as well. You can't really see it very well, so I'm going to show it right here. So population kind of has these little loops, and population goes off into famine, or it can go off into war, goes into technology, hubris, population, or it can go all the way to pollution. And it's all about information circles because the uh, things that might be a threat to man's survival, information wise, can be technological progress, population increase, or errors in thinking and attitudes, which would prove our values wrong. Now, let's get away from this. Circle back to dialectics. You have a dialectical system. You have someone presenting his argument. You have someone questioning. And when you have someone presenting his argument, he's going to say syllogism or proposition, or he might even say a story or whatever he wants, however he wants to answer the question. And I would say if he's a good dialectician, he will use a story. He will not use a story. He will use a proposition, or better yet, a syllogism, and say exactly why he believes what he believes in the most clear sense possible. But this will cause a feedback loop because then the guy questioning will kind of end up influencing the argument by deciding where this guy will go with the argument through the question being asked. And so what happens is like there's this little uh, thing that goes on as the guy gets his question to be more clear. Now, if the questionnaire were to be really rude and try to refute within the question as opposed to getting the question to allow the person to talk more further in detail about why he believes certain things, this too will cause a reaction. In fact, a lot of times when people get thinking improper dialectic, what happens is that a lot of people end up finding these really bad YouTube comment section type issues within their thinking. They might be like, "You're an idiot," or they might be like, "What is your problem, dude?" Or they might be like, pretty much without any sense of goodwill. And that's what we need is goodwill when we discuss things. And that's why I have been doing stuff throughout my channel on argumentation because I want you guys to be prepared for uh, thinking about things with goodwill and establishing goodwill. In fact, my next video on rhetoric will talk about eloquence and tell you stylistically what different styles of eloquence you can take from to establish goodwill. Now, going back to cybernetics, it's pretty much when you look at it, you have the thing that goes on, then it goes to this little loop of a output. So you have input A, input B, output. Input A, input B, output B, or output. It's pretty much all of it ends up as an output. And if you were to chart it out, very similar to a logical table. And a table of logic, for those of you who do not know, and I do not have a chart of it, so I'm not going to be able to show it to you, but um, it's the same concept. So you might have uh, x and y plus, or x plus y, uh, then p, t, or no, it'd be, let me get that better. So it would be true plus false equal the output, which would be that it must be false. If this is true and that is true, then that is false. If that is true and this is false, so on, so on, and so on, it will be that you have different logical things that take place that would inform your way of thinking. And all this is properly cybernetic. In fact, George Bull, I've talked about him in this channel before. I will talk about him again. In fact, hopefully, eventually, I'll get a whiteboard so I can show his different equations. He came up with all this stuff, and ultimately speaking, he kind of invented cybernetics when he invented Boolean logic and algebra. In fact, he's the father of the digital age. And so, anyway, you have all these outcomes that come into being from a former input. And that's basic cybernetics. So, if you're looking at a group, you're looking at your biases, you're looking at other people with biases, it's because based off of many different unknown factors, there's an ecology of mind that you have to interact with, and this little ecology kind of influences a lot of how they think. And so when you're interacting with this ecology, you're putting these data points in, and you're getting something back from their data points, and so you have this little clash that goes on. Don't panic on this point, because when you have this clash going on, you're learning. And the thing is, you want to always learn. So you try to find out exactly what's the problem going on. And from there, you might learn something new, or you might be able to edit your argument and say something much more proper, and much more true and much more acceptable. And that's all I wanted to talk about. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe.